The jungle didn't just surround them, it consumed them. It pressed into every breath, every heartbeat, every trembling step forward. The air lay heavy with rot and humidity, so thick it felt like a punishment, clinging to the skin until even strong men began to doubt their own strength. Somewhere ahead, hidden beneath layers of choking vines and sun-baked earth, the Japanese bunkers waited, silent, patient, and deadly. Each one was carved deep into the hillside, reinforced with logs and steel, designed to withstand artillery and swallow entire squads without leaving a trace. For weeks, American forces had hurled themselves against these positions, only to be pushed back again and again by machine gun fire that erupted from the shadows like the roar of some unseen predator. Corpses, American and Japanese, vanished into the mud, swallowed by a landscape that seemed to resent their presence. The ground shook with distant explosions, the air carried the sour smell of sweat and cordite, and soldiers spoke in hushed, fearful tones, as if the jungle itself were listening. Morale sagged. Each assault felt more hopeless than the last, and even the veterans began to wonder whether this island would become their grave. Private Tom Donovan wiped a sleeve across his brow, though the sweat was replaced as fast as he brushed it away. His uniform clung to him, soaked through, every thread stiff with dirt. Exhaustion etched itself into the corners of his eyes, but beneath the weariness lay something stubborn, an instinct for survival sharpened by too many close calls. Donovan wasn't the strongest in his squad or the loudest, but he had learned to read the land, to sense danger before it struck, to improvise when orders fell apart. In this jungle, resourcefulness mattered more than rank. He crouched low, listening to the distant thrum of enemy guns, feeling the faint tremor of another failed assault somewhere down the ridge. Around him, men muttered prayers or curses, gripping rifles with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Donovan inhaled slowly, tasting fear and determination on the same breath. Ahead, beyond the vines and the stench and the endless green, lay the bunkers that had broken every attempt so far. And he understood, in that heavy moment, that something had to change, because the jungle was swallowing men faster than they could be replaced. The first time Donovan hurled a regulation-issue Mk2 grenade at a Japanese bunker, he expected the explosion to crack open the fortified nest, or at least rattle the men inside. Instead, it bounced harmlessly off the slope log wall and rolled back toward him, fizzing like a dying sparkler before erupting in a muted burst that barely disturbed the dirt. The blast thudded against the bunker's exterior with all the effect of a kicked pebble. A moment later, the jungle screamed back. A burst of machine gun fire ripped through the undergrowth, splintering tree trunks and forcing Donovan and his squad to flatten themselves into the mud as bullets stitched the ground inches from their faces. It became a pattern, one that sapped hope with mechanical cruelty. Grenades tossed with perfect aim simply skittered off the heavy timber braces, detonating outside, where the blast dispersed uselessly into the open air. Even when they landed close, the Japanese bunkers absorbed the shock like immovable beasts, their thick walls shrugging off the explosions as if they were nothing more than firecrackers. Inside, the defending soldiers waited with chilling patience, emerging only long enough to unleash precise bursts that cut down anyone who dared run forward. Assault after assault ended the same way. The jungle floor trembled under American boots as squads charged with desperate resolve, only to be driven back almost immediately by gunfire so disciplined it felt inhuman. Donovan watched friends fall, men he'd shared rations with, joked with, leaned on during long marches, cut down before they could even reach grenade range. Each failure carved a deeper wound into the battalion spirit. Some soldiers began hesitating at the tree line, afraid of repeating the same deadly dance. Others hurled grenades with curses instead of confidence, knowing the outcome before it came. Donovan felt the truth settle like a weight on his chest. Their gear was failing them. The Mk2, the standard weapon every soldier trusted, simply wasn't designed for these fortresses carved into the earth. Against these bunkers, it was as good as throwing stones. As another assault collapsed in chaos and smoke, Donovan wiped mud from his face and understood with bitter clarity that if they kept fighting this way, the jungle wouldn't need to kill them. Their own equipment already was. The fight had been so close Donovan could still feel the heat of another man's breath lingering in the humid air. The skirmish ended in seconds, a blur of bayonets, tangled limbs, and desperate shouts, swallowed by jungle steam. When the last echo faded, Donovan knelt beside the fallen Japanese soldier, whose body lay half buried in leaves and mud, his rifle still clutched in rigid fingers. Donovan reached to ease it away when something else caught his eye. A small, oddly shaped sphere tucked beneath the soldier's belt, its metal surface scratched, dented, and stained by use. A Type 97 grenade. He froze, breath held tight. The stories about these Japanese grenades had spread through the battalion like whispered curses. Some said they detonated if handled too roughly. Others claimed they sometimes didn't explode at all, until they did, without warning, tearing apart anyone unlucky enough to be nearby. Their ignition system was infamous, a porcelain striker that soldiers had to slam against metal before throwing. Too hard, and it detonated early. Too soft, and it fizzled uselessly. It was a weapon built for danger, even to the man using it. "Leave it," Corporal Hayes muttered behind him, voice low with the kind of fear only experience could carve. "Those things are bad luck. Unstable as hell." Another man added, "Last guy who tried using one blew off his own hand. They're cursed, Don. Forget it." Donovan didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the battered grenade, its imperfections almost calling to him. In this jungle where every American weapon seemed to betray its owner, the danger of the Type 97 felt strangely honest. It wasn't weak. It wasn't hesitant. It didn't bounce off bunkers like a useless lump of steel. It was unpredictable, yes, but it was powerful. And power was what they lacked more than anything. He reached down slowly, feeling his heartbeat thrum through his fingers. The men behind him muttered warnings, crossed themselves, or took nervous steps back. Donovan lifted the grenade gently, cradling it like a relic taken from some forbidden shrine. In its weight he felt something shift. Fear, yes, but also the faint sparks of possibility. He didn't know it yet, but this risky trophy would change everything. The moment Donovan stood before the bunker, he felt the jungle closing around him like a clenched fist. The air was thick with the sour smell of rot and spent gunpowder, and the distant rattle of machine gun fire blended with the heavy thump of his own heartbeat. The Japanese pillbox loomed ahead, dark, silent, and waiting, its firing slit still smoking from the burst that had pinned down his squad for nearly an hour. Their own grenades had bounced off its reinforced walls like pebbles against iron. Every assault had been a lesson in futility. Now Donovan held the Type 97 in his shaking hand, and the weight of it felt both promising and deadly. He wiped sweat from his brow, though the humidity replaced it instantly. Hayes crouched behind a fallen log, eyes wide with dread. "Don, don't do it," he hissed. "That fuse goes bad, you're done." "Maybe," Donovan whispered, voice cracked by exhaustion and fear. "But if we stay here, we're done anyway." He pulled the pin. Nothing happened yet. The danger came next. With a deep breath, Donovan slammed the porcelain striker against the side of his helmet. A sharp crack rang through the jungle, followed by a sputtering hiss that sent a tremor up his arm. The fuse didn't burn smoothly. It coughed, flickered, and spat sparks like a dying fire. Every second felt stolen from fate. Donovan didn't wait. He sprinted forward, boots sinking into wet soil, lungs burning as he hurled the grenade toward the bunker's firing slit. The world seemed to suspend itself in silence, just long enough for him to dive behind a mangled tree stump and brace for impact. The explosion tore through the stillness like a violent exhale. A sharp, concentrated blast erupted from within the bunker, shaking the earth beneath him. Dirt and debris shot upward in a choking cloud. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the jungle seemed stunned into silence. Then Hayes rose slowly, disbelief etched across his face. "Holy hell, you actually did it." Donovan didn't speak, his pulse still hammered, his breath ragged, and his hands trembling uncontrollably. Yet beneath the fear, a new certainty flickered to life. Dangerous, reckless, undeniable. The grenade hadn't killed him. It had worked, and the path forward, terrifying as it was, had just shifted forever. At dawn, the jungle looked almost peaceful, wrapped in a mist that softened every jagged shape and muted every distant sound. But Donovan knew better. Beneath that quiet lay a stretch of fortified death, an interlocking network of Japanese bunkers carved deep into the earth, each one waiting like a watching eye. They had stalled every American advance for days. Men had died trying to break through. Morale was splintering. Even the veterans had stopped pretending they believed the line could be taken. But Donovan, clutching another Type 97 grenade, felt a strange calm settle inside him, a reckless understanding that if anyone had a chance of cracking the impossible, it was him. The first bunker of the morning nearly killed him. The fuse sputtered twice before catching, hissing like a snake poised to strike. Donovan sprinted through tangled roots as bullets shredded bark behind him. He slid against the bunker wall, counted 2 uneven seconds, then flung the grenade into a narrow opening before diving into the mud. The blast punched the air from his lungs, showering him with dirt and splintered timber. He staggered to his feet, half deaf, but the bunker was silent. One down. Word traveled fast through the squad. Some called him insane. Others called him their only hope. Hayes simply shook his head and muttered, "If he keeps this up, the jungle's gonna swallow him whole." But Donovan didn't stop. He moved from bunker to bunker with a strange mix of fear and clarity, each step guided by instinct sharpened through desperation. A malfunctioning fuse nearly detonated in his hand, glowing hot before he hurled it at the last possible instant. Another grenade released a shrill whistle that sent him diving face first into the dirt, convinced death was coming. One exploded late, so late he assumed it was a dud until the sudden shockwave knocked him flat. Every throw felt like negotiating with fate, one mistake away from oblivion. Yet the bunkers kept falling. Behind him, the squad followed in stunned silence, stepping over shredded earth and ruined fortifications that had once seemed indestructible. With each explosion, the men gained a little more ground, a little more hope, a little more belief that the impossible could be undone by one man with a weapon everyone else feared to touch. By midday, smoke drifted through the trees in heavy gray columns. Donovan's uniform was soaked with sweat, mud, and the acrid scent of explosive dust. His hands trembled uncontrollably, not just from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that he was balancing his life on the edge of a fuse each time he pulled the pin. Still, he pressed forward. By dusk, 20 bunkers had fallen, an entire defensive line ripped open by the same wrong grenade everyone had sworn would kill the man who tried to use it. And Donovan knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that something had changed, not just for the squad, but for the battle itself. The jungle grew quieter after the 20th bunker fell, but the silence felt heavier than gunfire. Donovan sat with his back against a twisted tree trunk, chest heaving, hands trembling so violently he had to press them against his thighs, just to steady them. Sweat burned his eyes. His uniform clung to him like a second skin soaked in fear and mud. Every breath tasted of smoke and the metallic sting of explosives. Around him, the squad moved softly, speaking in hushed tones, careful not to disturb the fragile stillness settling over him, as if one wrong word might shatter whatever was holding him together. He stared at his hands. These were the hands that had thrown the grenades, hands that had sent men, living, breathing, terrified men, into sudden darkness. He knew the Japanese soldiers inside those bunkers were enemies, trained to kill him without hesitation. But he also knew the truth no one wanted to speak aloud. The closer the fight, the more human the enemy became. He had seen their faces, heard their last cries echo through narrow bunker corridors, felt the vibration of their final breaths carried through earth and wood. Necessary or not, the weight of it pressed against him like a stone lodged deep in his chest. Guilt crept in quietly, slipping through the cracks left by adrenaline. Every explosion replayed behind his eyes. The flash, the shockwave, the final silence. He wondered whether survival justified everything he had done, whether the line between duty and brutality had blurred too far to see. Hayes sat beside him, offering a canteen with quiet understanding, but even that simple gesture couldn't pull Donovan from a storm inside his mind. Close-quarter combat had stripped away the distant soldiers often relied on to stay sane. There was no anonymity here, no faraway target seen through a scope. It was faces, voices, hands reaching in desperation. It was death inches away, sometimes his, sometimes theirs. As the evening light faded beneath the dense canopy and the jungle exhaled its humid breath, Donovan felt the truth settle in. He had survived the day, but parts of him had been left inside every bunker he destroyed. And as the squad prepared to push forward again, he sensed that the hardest battles were no longer the ones fought with grenades. The moment the grenade sputtered instead of hissing, Donovan knew something was wrong. The fuse gave off a faint, choking cough, nothing like the sharp, furious spark he had come to expect. For a heartbeat, he stared at it in disbelief, the jungle closing in around him with suffocating stillness. Then instinct slammed into him. He threw himself backward, boots slipping on wet soil, arms flailing for balance as the grenade tumbled from his hand and vanished into a patch of tangled ferns. Time fractured. He felt the panic seize his chest like a fist. The men behind him shouted warnings, their voices overlapping in frantic desperation. Hayes lunged forward, grabbing Donovan's collar and dragging him behind a collapsed tree trunk just as the grenade found its voice. The explosion erupted with a violent, concussive roar, close enough to lift Donovan off the ground and slam him hard into the earth. Dirt rained down on him in hot, stinging clumps. His ears rang. For a moment, the world dissolved into a blur of white noise and trembling breath. When the haze cleared, he realized how close he had come. Mere seconds, maybe less. If the fuse had caught earlier or later, or not at all, he would have been scattered across the jungle floor like so many others. His hands shook uncontrollably, a tremor he couldn't hide no matter how tightly he clenched his fists. Hayes knelt beside him, face pale with terror. "That's it, Don. Enough. You've pushed your luck too far. You keep going, you're gonna die out here." Others chimed in, voices quivering, pleading, angry. They told him he'd done more than anyone could have asked. They told him the breakthrough wasn't worth his life. They told him the battalion would understand if he stopped. But Donovan heard something else beneath their words. Fear, yes, but also the raw truth that without him, the assault would stall. The path he'd carved through the jungle was narrow and fading fast. The Japanese defenses were regrouping. Hesitation meant losing everything they'd gained. He sat up slowly, wiping the grit from his face. His confidence was cracked, fractured by the near miss, but not yet destroyed. The terror still clawed at him, but so did the knowledge that stopping now would doom his squad. He rose, legs unsteady, and reached for another grenade. The last bunker sat like a beast carved into the hillside, its stone-reinforced shell scarred by days of failed assaults. Smoke curled from its firing slit, each burst of machine gun fire slicing through the humid air like a warning growl. Donovan lay flat in the mud, chest pressed into the earth, feeling every vibration of gunfire travel through the ground and into his bones. The heat was suffocating, wrapping around him like wet cloth, and every breath tasted of dirt and cordite. This bunker wasn't just another obstacle. It was the heart of the Japanese line, the anchor holding their entire defense together. The squad was pinned behind him, shouting over the relentless drum of bullets. Hayes yelled his name, but Donovan barely heard it. His world had narrowed to the final Type 97 grenade clutched against his chest, the last of its deadly kind. Its scarred metal felt heavier than any he'd carried before, as if it understood this was the moment everything would hinge upon. He crawled forward inch by inch, mud swallowing his arms, roots snagging his sleeves, mosquitoes clouding around his face. A bullet snapped past his ear, so close it lifted a strand of hair. Another struck the log beside him, spraying splinters across his cheek. He didn't stop. The closer he got, the more the heat radiating from the bunker felt like a furnace fed by desperation. Near the entrance, he paused, heart thundering. This close, the bunker sounded alive. Shuffling footsteps, clipped commands, the metallic click of a weapon being reloaded. He gripped the grenade, feeling its abrasive surface bite into his skin. This was it. No second chances, no backup. He pulled the pin. The fuse crackled, but unevenly, sputtering with that familiar unpredictability that had nearly killed him hours before. Panic surged through him. He slammed the porcelain striker against a rock, sparks erupting in a violent burst. The hiss roared to life, furious, unstable. Donovan pushed off with every ounce of strength, hurling the grenade through the firing slit just as bullets erupted around him. He dove into the mud, covering his head with trembling arms. The explosion tore through the bunker like a thunderclap, shaking the earth and silencing the guns in an instant. When the smoke cleared, the hillside was quiet. For the first time in days, the line was broken. When the final blast faded, the jungle felt unnervingly hollow, as if the very air were trying to remember how to breathe again. For days, the battlefield had been a living furnace of fire and screams, but now an eerie quiet settled over the torn earth. Smoke drifted lazily from the shattered remains of the bunker line, rising like thin, gray ghosts dissolving into the canopy above. The company moved forward in cautious disbelief, step by step, passing craters, splintered logs, and the twisted shells of the fortifications that had caged them for so long. For the first time since the fighting began, there was no gunfire to answer, no hidden enemy waiting to cut them down. 20 bunkers, an entire defensive wall, lay broken behind them, and at the center of that impossible breakthrough sat Donovan, slumped on a patch of churned mud, hands buried in the dirt, not to brace himself, not to find cover, but because he needed to feel something solid, something living, something that didn't explode. His fingers trembled violently, clawing at the earth as though grounding himself to keep from floating apart. Sweat streaked down his mud-caked face, and his eyes stared straight ahead, not at the victory, not at the path they had carved, but at some distant point only he could see. The squad approached slowly, unsure whether to speak or give him the space his shaking body demanded. Hayes crouched beside him, but didn't touch him. He simply waited. To the men around him, Donovan no longer looked like the soldier they had arrived with. He wasn't just a man who'd cracked the line. He wasn't even just a hero. There was a haunted stillness in him now, a weight carved into his expression by every bunker he had destroyed. They saw a man who had survived fire by walking through it, and come out carrying shadows. History rarely pauses for the small stories, the ones born not on grand beaches or in famous cities, but in forgotten jungles, where men fought battles no headline ever mentioned. Yet the Pacific War was shaped as much by those unseen moments as by any major offensive, and Donovan's quiet defiance became one of those rare, hidden sparks that shifted the tide. The Type 97 grenade he relied on was infamous among American troops. Unpredictable, dangerously temperamental, a device more feared than trusted. Its porcelain striker and unstable fuse made it as likely to kill its user as the enemy. But in the brutal reality of bunker warfare, where standard American grenades struggled to penetrate fortified walls, its concentrated blast became the unlikely key to survival. Donovan hadn't set out to change tactics. He had simply refused to die. Yet in that refusal, he uncovered a truth the manuals had overlooked. The right weapon wasn't always the safe one, or even the familiar one. Sometimes it was the one every other soldier avoided. Word of his breakthrough spread quietly through the battalion, whispered between exhausted men as they pushed deeper into enemy territory. Soon, squads began retrieving Type 97s from fallen enemy troops, studying their quirks, learning their deadly rhythms. The wrong grenade had become a lifeline. But wars move fast, and the spotlight rarely lingers. Donovan's feat, 20 bunkers in a single day, was swallowed by the enormity of the Pacific campaign, eclipsed by larger battles, bigger names, grander victories. Official reports reduced it to a line or two. No medals marked the moment he changed the battlefield, but for the men who followed him through that suffocating jungle, his ingenuity meant life. His gamble rewrote their odds. In the end, Donovan's legacy wasn't carved in monuments. It lived in the quiet truth that sometimes one soldier, one idea, and one dangerous piece of enemy steel could turn an entire battle.